webinar. Welcome to this webinar that's organized by GADIP, Gender and Development in Practice, who is this association working with feminists in academia and feminists as activists. We are trying to follow different cases, situations all over the world. So we are quite international in our perspectives. And we are also part of a very big European network that's called Women and Development in Practice, White Plus. So this is one of our events, the first during this spring. And then we have another one, which we are going to announce as soon as we are ready with this webinar in March, the 11th of March, with Margot Wallström, the former foreign policy minister. Also, she was in charge of environmental issues as a commissioner at the European Union. So that's going to be our next webinar on the 11th of March. But now I am going to the webinar today. And today we are going to speak about news media, a blowtorch or break blog for gender equality. And in this presentation, according to the Global Media Monitoring Project, only 26% of the people in the news are women. There has been a slow increase since the first measurement in 1995 that had only 17% of women. But now we are 30 years after the UN Beijing Declaration in the platform of action, and it's time to ask why the progress is so slow, and what does this mean for gender equality and freedom of expression today. The Nordic countries have a higher share of women in news, but they're still not there in 50-50. So the newsrooms that succeed to reach 50-50 show that strategies matter. And to speak about that, we have Maria Edström, who's an associate professor in journalism, media, and communication, affiliated to the University of Gothenburg. And she has been very much involved in these GMMP studies since the year 2000. As well as many other media and gender equality research projects. I have known Maria for many years as a colleague at the university, and she has been an activist, quite inspiring for all of us in these issues regarding news media and gender equality. So I don't remember she has been also at the conference in Beijing, but she has been in many other conferences and has been also speaking as panelist for GADIP in many other events. So thank you for coming and welcome, Maria. Please, the word is yours.
Thank you so much. First, I would like to excuse myself if I start coughing because I've been having a cold. But I'm very happy to be able to talk a little bit about the news media and reflect upon why that matters for the global development. And one of the starting point is what Edme was talking about, this who makes the news reports that I have been involved in, where people around the world voluntarily gather data, and then you get like a global pattern about what's going on in the news media. And it is a very slow progress, and I will come back to why that is and how this has developed. So during my 30 minutes or something like that, I will talk about this, why gender equality in the media is important to think about regardless where you are in society, and also talk a little bit about the tension between gender equality and freedom of expression as two fundamental values. And to do that, I will give you some context that maybe it's too basic for some of you, but I thought it's still interesting to have this media gaze on it. And as I said in the beginning here, it would be based on these global media monitoring projects that I've been involved in, and also in a research project that we had at the Department of Journalism at the University of Gothenburg called the GEM project. And so what I'm talking about, you can also read, of course. And so I just leave you some references here, and you can catch up on more. And I just came back before I caught my cold in Copenhagen, actually, where we had a big conference, Who Makes the News, a Nordic summit on gender equality in the news. And I mentioned this because there are actually video recording of the major part of the day, like 4 hours, that you can find on the conference website or on the Nordicom YouTube channel, where you can follow along with where the key coordinator of the Global Media Monitoring Project attended, and all the Nordic coordinators and other international guests. And also we had panels with editors and a lot of stuff going on there, and also good practices. So I really recommend you to take a look at those that seminar and conference that just took place in Copenhagen. And that was funded, by the way, by the Nordic Council of Ministers, which is like, if GADIP wants to do stuff, I mean, that's a place to consider to get funding. And when you come from the journalism and media side, it's always important to have like a common ground on where do we begin, like why is this still important? And you can have various arguments like you have in politics and everything, but like if you just take the first argument that women make up half of the population, and you can say that that's like a question of human rights and freedom of expression, the democracy argument. But then if you go to the newsrooms, you can also say that the editors are missing out on or ignoring even stories that will be of great interest for the public. And that's the editorial argument, that they're not doing their job. But also, if you think of media industry as a commercial business, you could think that it's not profitable to prioritize only half of the population. So that's like the popular common arguments that I use when I'm in touch with newsrooms or others. And the other like basic thing is that we all are kind of involved in this the 2030 agenda for sustainable development for sustainable development, and how we shall survive on this planet, so to speak. But if you look at the media issues in these goals and the 169 sub goals, it is very difficult to find them. But from my point of view, there are these two goals that are key here, and it is the gender equality, of course, but it is also about peace, justice, and strong institutions. And both these goals are like based on fundamental values, but have very different histories. And when you look at like what are the basic arguments for freedom of expression and gender equality, you can say that freedom of expression is based on the assumption that you should have non-censorship, that you should be able to speak, and that there should be a diversity of voices. And also there is this, should the state regulate, or should the media and other institutions serve as like a self-regulator? So those are like three components of freedom of expression. And then when you think of gender equality, it's about equal rights and opportunities and non-discrimination. And the freedom of expression arguments and foundations and legislation are much, much older than the ones for gender equality, as you all know. But when you go a step further, closer to the news media, you look at the press freedom index, for instance. This is a map of where you have the most press freedom in the world, and the green areas are the best, and the darker it gets, like dark red, it's the worst. And what you can see, like if you would place a similar map like this on gender equality, you would see that the countries overlap a lot. If you have high freedom of expression and freedom of the press, you usually have high gender equality, and the same way around. So what comes first, gender equality or freedom of expression? That's yet to be explored, I think. But what you can say is that, and usually these two like topics are never discussed together, but it's starting to get there. So in the United Nations has a special rapporteur on freedom of expression, and in 2021, for the first time, they connected the two topics of gender equality and freedom of expression. And I think that's a very important time and thing that happened there, because usually you have all these conferences about freedom of expression, and then you have all these other things on gender equality, and they never meet, so to speak. And after 2021, Irene Khan has continued to elaborate on these topics and how we could continue to have these issues on the same table, so to speak. And on the other side, you see that we all know that freedom of expression is under threat, so to speak, but so is gender equality. And there are various reports showing the decline for gender equality as a core value in society, which of course is very problematic if you work with these issues and think, of course, that they are important. And one report that came in 2020 that made kind of the news was that there was this backlash that both men and women think that, for example, that men are better leaders and better politicians and so on. And it continues, that the gender biases continues, and so we have like a general problem with also anti-gender movements on the rise and so on. So we are in a complicated situation, and one way to describe it is I think this is just a funny quote from Anam Parves, who says the world is completely off track in achieving gender equality. I wouldn't go that far, but I think it's like we need to be aware of that those like universal values are no longer universal. And then we come back like, so I just track you a little bit down on the United Nations commitments, like where are the media issues here? And I think the first you will find in the Article 19 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Like here you have the right to freedom of opinion and expression, which is key, of course. But that, as you all know, doesn't mean that we achieve it, and that, of course, that women weren't in the conversation there. They were kind of sidetracked there, and that's why as I understand it, CEDAW came about, because I mean they already in 1946 they started working with getting to monitor the situation of women and to promote women's rights. And in 1979, finally CEDAW came, and they don't talk about the media yet, but they talk about the elimination of prejudice, and they start talking about stereotype roles for women and men. And there you come closer to the media, realizing that, oh, well, here we have something to build on. And the first concrete move towards that was at the in 1995 with the Beijing Platform for Action and Declaration and Platform for Action, where you have the 12 goals, where one is specifically on women and the media, where you ask state parties and the governments and industries to increase the participation and access for women to the media, and also to promote a balanced and non-stereotypical portrayal of women in the media. And the thing is that, just as out of curiosity, Sweden were against this Section J, because they thought that would be an infringement of freedom of expression, that any writings about gender equality in the media would be like limiting the media. So, but finally Sweden actually signed. But I think it's interesting, and I think Sweden wasn't the only country objecting to Section J. that's why I would say that you could say that it has vanished a little bit from the global agenda. And even though you have all these recommendations and very steady things about the media, it's not only, if we go back to the 12 areas, if you read them like the original document, you see that media is like part of every strand here, that if you talk about violence against women, you have to talk about media. If you talk to women about economy or in decision making and power, media is in almost every topic here. But you tend to forget that and only look at your own area. And then, like, building from these three documents, you have the Sustainable Development Goal that actually also has, I mean, you have to read carefully, and you will find things there that you have to ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms. But the thing is that it's in accordance with national legislations. So you wouldn't interfere if, say, you don't want to put in monitoring of gender equality in the media as a imperative demand. But you could say that both freedom of expression and gender equality is part of the portal text and is there for everyone to work on, because they emphasize all the former documents that are still valid, and that's where, if you work like I do with the media, that's where you can like use that as a way forward. And also, if you look at goal 5, you're probably all aware of that. But the interesting thing is that it goes across all targets. And usually what I found when I worked with the Sustainable Development Goals is that everybody works with their own box, so to say. And they haven't read up on the other goals. And most people haven't read that gender equality is a cross-cutting theme for all the others. And it's not possible to achieve the other goals if it's not there. So I think that's very interesting. And then below here, you see the only indicator. I mean, that also, first I say it's very important, but then you can also say that it's very unimportant. I mean, this is a compromise document where instead of saying press and media and news or anything, it's about technology, and you should empower women through technology. And how do you measure empowerment of technology? It's the use of a mobile phone, which, if you know something about, say, gender violence and control, you know that mobile devices can be liberating, but it can also be a controlling device. And it's a very poor indicator, I would say. And they don't have any indicators of women in the news or women as editors or owners or boardrooms, or there's nothing there to collect. So people in various institutions are not gathering the data for more knowledge. That's just me whining maybe, but I think it's problematic. But you can find things, if you like, also in goal 16, like when they talk about peace, justice, and inclusive societies, there are ways of looking at it with a gender lens and see that here is where we can go forward. But unfortunately, as both like civil society, companies, governments work with the Sustainable Development Goals, we have this other development. In a couple of weeks, this VDEM report for 2026 will come, and I'm afraid that it will not be better. It's getting worse every year when they look at where is democracy going. And you can see here the increase of people living in autocracies, and we have huge problems in many parts of the world. And not only that, we also have this problem with hate speech. And this is, I like this image because it's like the pyramid of hate. Where does it begin? With the stereotypes and misrepresentation that was addressed in already in 1979 in CEDAW, and how that leads to discrimination, hate speech, and hate crimes. And I think this is a image from an Italian report honoring Joe Cox, who was a British parliamentarian who was murdered in 2016, 10 years ago. And since then, it's become even worse. Like it's you have this online violence that's spilling offline, and there are several reports on that, especially targeting journalists, politicians, and activists. So there we have some problems, and even though you think that the state parties have a huge responsibility here for securing freedom of expression and information rights and securing gender equality, others actors are of course responsible too, coming, not the least to the social media platform providers who expect to be regulated, but you can't really do that. So it's like very problematic right now. And coming up now is the Commission on the Status of Women in New York, and I look at the program and wonder, like, are these issues of gender and news media a lost topic on the global agenda? Because this year you really could connect the news media to the topics, but I don't see it happening. I know that the global coordinator from the Global Media Monitoring Project, she will be there in one seminar, but I failed to see where the discussion is going. That said, I will go into this problem of lack of women in the news and the Global Media Monitor Project, which is, I encourage you all to participate next time. That will be in 2030. Every fifth year, one day, hundreds of thousands of people around the world are collecting data to make like a global snapshot of what is the status of gender equality in the news. And up until 2020, there was more and more countries contributing. But now we see a very problematic decline, that only 94 countries participated last year, which I think is also an issue of lack of funding, lack of support to civil society, lack of support for universities, and so there aren't people who can do this job, which of course is very problematic. But what this study does is that it looks at the stories, the journalists and reporters, people in the news, and do some analysis of the status. And they also do. I would like to mention that they have, like, every year, like, a special theme. So in 2015 it was conflict areas, and then in 2020 it was COVID, and this year it was gender-based violence. And just to give you an idea, when they looked at the conflict, women in the news in countries in armed conflicts, you see that the numbers of women in the news were even worse. So you often say that women are not on the negotiation tables, but they are not in the news either. And if they're not in the news, where do you get an idea of what's going on in a conflict? So I think it's very problematic. And if you look at the results from this last study, here is an image of the Nordic countries and the global. So the global is the thicker blue line, and the slow development from 17% in 1995 in Beijing, and then that was reported and presented in Beijing, and to 26. So it's almost a flat line. They say that development is on a plateau, whereas the Nordic countries goes a little bit more up and down, and that has to do, of course, that one day in one country doesn't really make good data sometimes. So the lines could jump a little bit. So the real strength in the Global Media Monitoring Project is the global development. But nevertheless, for us in the Nordic countries, we felt it's very important also to discuss the differences, like why is Denmark going down, and why did Iceland perform better, and so on, and why are Norway and maybe also Sweden in a decline. So it helps us to reflect, and especially being in dialogue with the newsroom and ask them what they're doing. And if you just look at certain topics, like the first here figure is like the global development. Slowly it's increasing women in the news, but you also mark that it's only up until 50. Yeah, I mean, it could be 100% women. No country, or like they don't reach above 50%. And the progress is quite slow. And even worse when it comes to women politicians. And I think it's interesting for a Nordic context that where we have a lot of female politicians, many political parties in the parliament, you have a 50-50 or 45-55. But in the news, the women politicians are not that newsworthy. And if you go to experts, I mean, there's a lot of female experts, but they are not in the news, which of course only makes things more complicated. That why do not the news find the female experts? Or is it because the female experts don't want to talk to the news media now when you are at risk? There are several examples of, say, if you are a climate reporter, you are bound to be harassed if you go out in public. And if you're a climate expert, that will happen to you as well. And then you think, like, if there are more female reporters, this will not happen. But as you see on this slide, we have a lot of female reporters already. And we actually have in the Nordic countries a lot of female editors and head of organizations. So even though we have a more gender balanced situation, it doesn't impact that much on the news, even though we can see that women are more likely to actually interview women than men are. Both men and women interview both men and women, but there are more women who also interview more women. So it becomes a little bit more balanced. So that is the problem of like the news content, you might say. But then you have the tension here, like between should we regulate the media or should we not? And if we regulate, will we limit the freedom of expression? And so far, not much has happened. The Council of Europe, some different organizations has demanded that the state parties report back on certain things and that you keep track on gender equality in the news. But not much is happening on the national side. In Sweden, we had in the broadcasting permits for public service that you should, the content should be on an annual basis, have gender equality and diversity as a leading mark. But that is taken out now. It only was between 2014 and 2025. And for the next broadcasting permits, there is nothing said about diversity and gender equality, because and the newsrooms are very happy about this, because that they see that as an infringement of their rights to do, the news that are the most important. So the third problem then, like whether the news could be like a breaking block or a blowtorch, is of course that if you're a female journalist, and if you're a journalist in general today, you are bound to be under threat in one way or another. And it could be just complaints, but it could also be worse than that. And I really recommend, if you have a chance, to look at that. The investigative reporter My Wingren, who did a documentary called Hacking Hate that goes around various festivals around the world now, and it's also possible to view it on the Swedish SVT Play. To get an idea of the efforts that you have to make as a journalist to cover the manosphere, so to speak, that is actually threatening many journalists today. And then I would also like to address the issue about the lack of data in general. I mean, there's so much we don't know still about gender situations in society. And those numbers here I took from a report on water assessment, and they just wanted to show how little data and how few countries are reporting back on sex disaggregated data on water. But if you see the last line here, media has even less. It's only 15% of countries that delivered sex disaggregated data. It's almost nothing. So still so little. And that's why the GMP report is so important. And that's also why we try to, in the Swedish report, also we ask the newsrooms, what are you doing? And we ask the universities, how do you address this in your education, in journalism? So we try to collect other data in order to make some time series for the long run. And then, of course, when you think of the lack of data, it's also a matter of, like, how do you categorize people at all? And that's a tricky question, of course, when you want to use quantitative data. And I just show you how the GMP operationalizes this sex and age as an example. And here you can see that you use male, female, gender diverse, and do not know. And what it turns out is that it's a minuscule part that is not male or female here. So we get good data on the big groups and not so good data on the smaller groups. But what we have during the years developed, which I worked a lot with aging and health, and that separating, not lumping all old people together. So there are actually two categories of older people in the GMP, which makes it possible for us to track now where are the oldest population in the news, or are they there at all? So now I will end talking about a project that we got some funding from the Swedish Research Council to compile the few data that exist into an open access data set in order for more researchers to use news media data and combine it with other data. So the GEM project was about comparing countries and situation and try to enhance the use of this very few data that exist. So we were a little group of researchers that were responsible for various data sets that being collected. And there are very few, actually. So the only three that we found that exist is the Who Makes the News that continues every 5th year. And then there's this one-hit wonder of the status of women in the news media regarding the newsrooms that took place in 2010. And there hasn't been repeated because there's no funding, but there was a huge study from 59 countries that also came out several other scientific articles and books and stuff after that. And then you have the European Institute for Gender Equality, EIGE, who tracked down media organizations for one of these Beijing follow-ups for 2015. And they also actually have in the Drivers for Change report that came out now for the Beijing 30 plus, where they actually address the media and talks about how have we advanced in Europe. But anyway, so what we did in this project, that we compiled a book where we try to apply, like, if you use this data together with other data, what kind of studies can you make? And then we wanted a simple way of calculating gender equality in the news, that you don't need to wait every 5th year. You could do it yourself in your newsroom if you're in a study group or whatever. So we created a GEM index. I'll come back to that. And then we also asked all these former studies to deliver their data to us, and we curated them so they can be used together with all other big data that you have in other databases and data sets. So the GEM index, then, why we were very happy to present that, was that we thought that, like, if you just want to do some simple calculating, what could you look at and what has an impact and is fairly stable. So we looked at if women are in the news as subjects or sources, are there any female reporters? And then we looked at the status filled roles as women as experts or women as spokesperson as a measurement. And then we also looked at topics that are considered high status, business and economy and politics and governments. Are there any women there? And then we made this very easy kind of calculating scheme that you could actually do it by hand in your own newsroom and look over time, and then you compare it with a national index or with a competitive organization or anything else. Unfortunately, our funding didn't reach, to do the pedagogical material and everything, but the GEM index is actually used. But through this book and what we did, we actually found, like with all these analyses that we did together with our fellow colleagues around the world, was that news media do not reflect reality. And that's very important to remember. And that what you see in the news is less equal than the actual world. And that is, of course, very problematic. And that speaks to this, that news media might be a break block to understanding the world. And when you see how much are women marginalized in various countries, and it's related to their standing in society. Like if you don't have a high level of gender equality in a country, you won't be in the news media either. And it also depends on how much there are female journalists and editors. And it's also about how many media outlets are they? Are they autonomous towards the state? And what is the state of democracy in the countries? But what we also emphasize in that book and in the project is the lack of comparable data. Because, I mean, it is a problem that you don't problematize the news enough. And so, of course, I just skipped this picture, but I will just like to show you one example of how you could use the GEM data set. So Sarah Macharia, who's actually the global coordinator of the Global Media Monitoring Project, she chose to relate the media presence of women in terms of business and economy and labor market, so to speak, to the share of women in the labor force. And as you see, women are working all over the world, right? That's the orange color there. But in the news, they are not present. And that makes you, like, you get your ideas a lot from the media, what's going on in society. But if it's not shown, it is a huge problem. Another thing, an example of how to use the GEM index is to relate it to other indexes. So here is the VDEM, the Liberal Democracy Index, that Monica, my colleague, compared with and did a correlation with the GEM index, and that is published in the report. And now for the conference, we also did like the development of the GEM index around the world. You can look at different parts of the world or different countries, the development. But what you can see here is a very slow development. Like the +100 means that it's all women in the news. -100 is all men. And like you can't see, I mean, we're closing in towards a balance, which would be the red line, but it's going very, very, very slow. And I don't think I will live to see when it's gender equal in the news. But the other interesting thing is that it's a huge difference between countries participating in the study, where the Nordic countries fare quite good, you could say, but there's a huge difference between the Nordic countries here. And also that there are a lot of countries here that are almost only men in the news. And then you have to consider all the countries that are not participating. And if you're interested in the data set, it's available through the University of Gothenburg. And you can just download it in Excel or Stata or SPSS. But what you also need to think about is that there are few areas. as I said, that has so few information about, gender-related data as the media. So it's very important that we continue to collect this, but it's very difficult to get funding for it, especially this GMP. Without the activists and volunteers, it wouldn't happen that we have this unique time series from 1995 to 2025. But what we find is that some countries participate 1 year and not another. So the time series might not be so strong. But we also did some correlation about the missing countries, the countries that don't participate in, maybe not in the GMP, and they're not part of the press freedom and media freedom ranking either. So there are these blank spots in the world where you know very little about their situation, both on gender equality or about the status of freedom of expression. So I think I will wind up and just say so what do we do when freedom of expression and gender equality is contested, and who is responsible for advancing freedom of expression and information right? Who's responsible for securing and advancing gender equality? And you can think it could be the state, right? But you can't rely on the state, and nor can you rely on the media industry. And that's hence the question about being a break block or a blowtorch. I mean, it depends on where your interests are. But I do think civil society could make demands on both state parties and the media industry on having a diversity of voices and be non-discriminative and include more stories that are not there. And of course, as individuals, you could always do something, but maybe not so much. But at one CSW in New York, I met this Sheila North, and she just said we all have a role to play in this life and to make it better in every way, and we all have opportunities to do that every day. So with that, I just thank you for your attention, and I give some possibility. I leave you with the slides also. You can download the global report here, and we also have it available online, the Swedish report, in case you speak Swedish. We have that as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. This is really a lot of information that we have to take in. And now we can open for questions or comments or whatever you want to share with us, the participants, and we are opening this. So please feel free to write your questions in the chat, or if you want to speak, you tell us in the chat that you want to speak so we can open it for you as well. But perhaps while the people here are reflecting on what they are wanting, they want to ask, I would ask some of the first questions, perhaps. And I would like to ask, when the whole project started? Was it before Beijing or after Beijing? And how have you been able to get in contact with so many countries? So what are the mechanisms that have made that possible to start with?
I think that's the beauty of the internet, that people actually have been in touch, and it actually was a conference in Bangkok before Beijing. So maybe it was in 3 years before, 2013 or 2012, I don't remember, when they said we should, monitor the media. So in the first time it was 71 countries. We didn't know about it here in Sweden. So we learned about it. Some friends and colleagues went to Beijing, and we heard about the project and said, but we want to be part next time. So that's how Sweden got involved. And I think that's how many people, both research and activists, have been hearing it from someone else and hearing it presented. But it's always been like almost, and that goes for the IWMF studies, where almost impossible to, you know, the hardship gathering data and gathering. We have, like in the Swedish report this year, FOIO is talking about their fellow partners. They help Myanmar to train them to do the monitoring 2020. And then with the political developments, they managed to do it in 2025, but in exile and monitoring the online news only. So it's like a lot of efforts for everybody to take part. And that's what I meant with fewer countries taking part this year, is because it's so difficult, and basically you don't have any funding, and people are volunteering to do the monitoring. But then you can always find some countries that maybe get extra funding. Like for a couple of years, Finland, I know, got funding from the Ministry of Social Affairs. They decided that it's important for Finland to have this data, so they funded the data gathering. So, I mean, various countries can make different decisions, but it's also very difficult if you're not, I mean, there are countries that sign up and then they find it too difficult to be part of it, because you may be at war, you may be, you know, don't have, I mean, during COVID, it was, of course, really difficult to gather people to do this kind of stuff. And so I think it's like, there were some clever people in the beginning saying that we should do this, and the organization that's been around for the last years is actually an organization called World Association of Christian Communication, that is kind of hosting the GMP. So in there, because they work with social justice and gender and things like that, and they are kind of the stable partner in this, and making sure. And then, of course, UN Women have, contributed with some funding. But I know that every year is a question about, will there be a report? Will there be someone able to coordinate? Because it's quite costly, also, of course, to do the data gathering and analysis and being in touch with all these countries, as you say. And maybe I can say also, that's why we were so happy about this conference in Copenhagen 2 weeks ago, because that was the first time that we gathered in the Nordic countries for these 30 years, that we actually were able to, on a more like higher level, discuss these things, and also have the global coordinators there to discuss with us, and also have the editors to talk about their strategies and their awareness or lack of awareness, and also bring in, we have had women's shelters organizations and cyber violence groups talking about like the challenges that they see today. But I mean, as it tells you something, that even if the rich countries like the Nordic countries can't manage to have a proper discussion until 30 years have gone by.
Yes. Also, I mean, I'm still waiting for people to show some comments, or I don't know. Sarah perhaps can activate question, the question and answers function, because she's the host now. But I was going to ask you, how has been the response within the European Union countries? Because you have spoken a lot about the Nordic countries,
No.
and you mentioned AG, also the European Union. But has there been any response from the European Union countries or at the European Union level?
I don't think you can't expect really something from the European level yet, because the global report came out in December, and some of the national reports are still not ready, because since it is a voluntary work, some countries haven't done their national report yet, so it will come during the spring. And on the website whomakesthenews.org, you can actually find the national reports, but they have still not been uploaded from all the countries yet. But it is a great resource if you want to know more. And I think that's also what's missing, because now is really the time for advocacy, like the next coming 5 years, to kind of make known this stalling of progress in the world, and what does that mean for our understanding of what challenges we are facing. And if you're not aware of and can reflect on the role of the media, I think it's not so good, so to speak. So really, I mean, what we are doing now is also like, we actually, from the conference, we will write to EG, and we will also try to contact European Women's Lobby and other organizations to try to push the issues of the news media. But for myself, of course, I would have liked to see much more now on the CSW on these topics. But you could just see how it deteriorated. Last year, it was the Beijing +30, and there were some writings, from the CSW to the 30 plus, how do you say, in the General Assembly on Beijing. And at that state, it was nothing left about the media in the documents. It's like it just goes away. So it's you need strong advocates on these issues.
Now we have a question.
I met Vega Montiel. I just want to say, I met Vega Montiel in Mexico. She's part of the Mexican delegation, and she always kind of pushes these questions into the agenda and manages sometimes to have, the topic there.
Thank you. Maria, there's a question here from the audience, and she says, it's Susanne. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I was thinking a bit about the intersectional perspective on media, particularly from the Swedish context, both when it comes to representation, but also how different women are portrayed. Could you say something about that?
Yes. When it comes to the GMMP, I think it is not, since it's just one day, we don't want to say too much about the intersectional perspectives. We talk about it of gender and age and minority, majority things, but it's like the data doesn't permit us. But I mean, there are quite good studies about intersectional topics, both in the newsrooms and in the media, but that they are more qualitative studies, which I think you need to have in order to get like some proper research done, because this broad task that GMMP has is really on that. You can only see these ages are present, or this, are you in a minority group or majority group, but it doesn't really tell you how, because I think that was the question also, how are they described? But in general, you could say that if you're in a minority group of any kind, you are less likely to be in the media. And if you're there as the exception, or you do this combined, that you have to represent all groups as one person, if you understand what I mean. That, I mean, the newsroom are aware of the lack of diversity, and they try to kind of bring in as much as possible. So if you're a young woman with a background outside the Nordic countries, you're more likely to be visible, like if they catch you, so to speak. They're very eager to. But I think that the mindset is still for the news to cover power and hold power into account, which of course is one of the main topics. But you could say that people are, on the other side of power, suffering from the power, and there you have the whole population. And there, as a newsroom, you have to be a little bit more clever to kind of find those stories. And I think in talking about Swedish context, I really think that the journalists now are doing a good job making, like, turning numbers into people, so to speak, so you know who we are talking about when you talk about these changes in permanent residency in Sweden, and the teenagers that have to leave the country now. I don't have the right English words, the correct legislative terms, but I do think that now journalists are really trying to make, the power has made a decision, a change of legislation that affects people, and now they are actually finding them. They could have found them, of course, long time before, but now it's actually happening, and now they are doing their job. And there are stories about children, there's stories about young adults, women and men, and it's like there's one new horrific story every day. So I mean, so it's not, the GMP is not for like understanding the whole picture. That's just what I'm saying. But it shows you the global patterns.
Mm. Okay. Anybody else that wants to ask anything from Maria? And I'm speaking also about the people here in the panel, Alice or Sarah, or anybody from the audience, of course. Mm?
Yes, I have a question because you mentioned.
Alice, can you open your camera?
Oh, yes, of course. Um, I don't know if you can see me now.
Yes.
Good. So I have a question because you mentioned comparing the VDEM to the GEM index.
Yes.
Was there a correlation there between those, or
Yes.
what did you, or
It
your
was
colleague?
a positive correlation that the higher the democracy level, the better the GEM index, so to speak. But it's not a clear pattern. There are exceptions, but I mean, you have it there, and you can find it in the GMP 2020 report. I could share the. No, I can't. I thought I could share maybe a screenshot again of that. Now maybe you see it.
Yes, thank you.
That you see that there is a positive correlation, but it's still, you see how scattered the countries are. So it's not like when you look at all the countries, there is a positive correlation, but still, like if you look at one country, it might be very not so clear. But it is like gender equality and democracy goes hand in hand, so to speak, and that goes also for the news media coverage.
Thank you. I thought it was a very interesting, like two indexes to compare. So
Yes. And I think in this year they have done the comparison of the GEM index and gender social norms, well, like social norms in society, which is of course very interesting to look at. So there are many, I mean, there are a million ways of using this, and we just in this research project we just did this like infrastructural contribution for others to use. So maybe you can, find a better way of using it. And also that we felt that in many of these, I mean, it's very popular with big data these days, and you want to do patterns of all kinds of things, what's going on in society, but you don't add on the media, the news media into that. So our idea of having the GEM data set and the GEM index was that it would be easy for researchers if they are looking at some topic, whether it's the labor market or if it's gender-based violence or whatever, you could find things in the GEM index that you could compare with and kind of add on the question, does the media contribute or stall the development, so to speak? And that's like, there's not one answer to that. But I mean, if you don't take in the news media as a part of the equation on where are we heading, I think you're kind of missing out. And I think it's also, if you are a researcher activist, you have to also be aware of these mechanisms that are, why is it more newsworthy with this topic historically, so to speak, than that topic, and how do we make journalists aware of their own biases, so to speak, that they haven't thought of, say, the gender aspects of taxation, for example. They just do stories on taxation, and they don't think about that there is a gender dimension to that. And that goes for almost every subject. So it's a matter of raising the knowledge, of course, among journalists, but also I think among researchers and activists to take in the news into to their questions.
Mm.
Do you understand what I mean? It's like work both ways.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Maria.
And I have something else also that I was wondering, Maria, because you
Yes.
mentioned conflicts and wars
Yes.
and women in conflicts, and I think this
Yes.
is very relevant today.
Yes.
I was looking precisely at the news regarding the war in Ukraine, which is going to go to its 4th anniversary.
Yes.
And I was looking also at the news regarding women resisting the war within Russia. And there are very scarce news about that. Of course, there are some, and I was just looking at that, because there are lots of things happening that we are not aware of.
Yeah.
I mean, we are aware of militarization, but we are not aware that people within Russia, especially women and families, are struggling against the war. So my question is, was Russia part of your study before the war?
Before the war, yes. In 2020, there was a coordinator, and they were actually supported by Foyo Media Institute in their democratization and partner countries. So Foyo Media Institute, who is based in Linné University, is now the national coordinator of the Swedish study. But they also help other, partners to be part of the study. So Rwanda was part of the study now for the first time since, I think, 2005 or something, 20 years ago they took part, but now they did it again. And the same thing goes with Russia, that at that point in 2020, they had programs, democracy programs and stuff in Russia that legitimized that they supported them in collecting and working with the GMP. But now with the situation, I think they don't work with Russia anymore. I'm not sure. You have to contact Foyo, but at least Russia was not part of the 2025 report. And I don't know about the coordinators there either. But you could, if you're looking for a person to contact, you can just look at the 2020 report and find the national coordinator for Russia there. Or contact Foyo directly.
No, I was just struck by the fact that there are so few news around that.
Yes. And that goes, I think it's like if you think of international relations and the military industrial complex and everything, is a lot of things that works well with the news media that you see again now, if you're as old as I am, that you see it coming back, some rhetorics and how news media is kind of finding the angle to that more jobs in certain industries and more exports, and it becomes like a business question or a strategy questions, and then again you wonder who is not part of the situation there. So it's good that you're looking into that topic. And I'm sure, there are a lot of both peace and development studies and other that actually are continuing this discussion on or research on certain topics like conflict areas, especially I would say in Oslo, with Oslo Met, Kristin Skare Orgeret and others are really working with these topics.
And what about the United States?
I think they are, as part of the GMP, they're very active and collect data and so on. But what, other than that, I'm really not sure what's going on, because the media situation is very strained, right? That's the problem with these topics, that the whole news media industry are in crisis in the sense that it's all social media platform. Nobody thinks it's worthwhile having traditional legacy media. And the legacy media is kind of bleeding money. and are at the threat of being closed down all the time now, especially in the US. So we have the news media is facing challenges from many other places, not only the lack of gender equality, so to speak. And they might not think that we must survive. That's what our topic, you know. And that's why they don't think this is on like some top of their mind, so to speak. But I would say that in Sweden, when we talk to newsrooms in Sweden, they are very concerned and they have routines for this. A lot of newsrooms work with 50-50 goals, and they always have like a expert list, and they look at people, you know, from all various countries to get a good and diverse, and not only on gender equality, they try to make it as a routine for the newsroom to have a better diversity. But then again, there are newsroom who doesn't really work on it at all, and that's why the mean becomes so low that we only have 37% women in the news, according to the GMP. Because the good and the bad together makes a mean.
Okay. Anybody else? We are just taking advantage of having Maria here to pose all these questions. But of course, we will try to make this recording of the webinar available in our homepage, so we can have also all the resources regarding links and the reports, etc., etc. But if we don't have any more questions or comments, then perhaps we should be closing. So I really want to thank you, Maria, for coming here and giving us this fantastic overview of all the work that is being done on these issues and all the problems it's confronting as much as many other things in the world today. But there is still hope.
Yes.
That, yes, many people are still working on this, and that we hope that you will jump back into priorities everywhere. I don't know if you want to say a few words at the
end. Thank you for the time, and that you are willing to consider the role of the news media in terms of how we will move forward in these topics of gender equality and development issues in general.
Okay, thank you again. And for the people who are still here, I just remind you that we have another webinar in less than a month, at the 11th of March, with and coming a bit back to all the situation internationally with the feminist foreign policy with Margot Wallström. So thank you, and we close this today then. Welcome back, and thank you, Maria, again.